The question of why we exist stands among the most profound and persistent questions humans ask. It surfaces in quiet moments, in times of transition, in periods of reflection when the routines of daily life pause and we find ourselves wondering about the larger significance of our presence in the universe. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why do we, as conscious beings, find ourselves here? Does our existence have a purpose, a reason, a meaning that extends beyond the mere fact of being? These questions belong to existential philosophy, the branch of philosophical inquiry that examines the fundamental nature and significance of human existence. The question can be approached from multiple directions, each revealing different aspects of the puzzle. There is the cosmological question about why the universe exists at all, why there is something rather than nothing. There is the biological question about why life emerged and why conscious beings, like ourselves, evolved. There is the personal question about what gives individual human lives meaning and purpose. And there is the philosophical question about whether existence requires justification, whether there must be a reason for being, or whether existence might simply be a brute fact requiring no further explanation. The ancient Greek philosophers approached these questions through the lens of purpose and teleology. Aristotle held that everything in nature has a telos, an end or purpose toward which it naturally tends. Acorns exist to become oak trees. Eyes exist to enable sight. Human beings exist to actualize their characteristic capacities, particularly reason, and to achieve eudaimonia, flourishing or living well. In this framework, the question of why we exist has a relatively straightforward answer. We exist to fulfill our nature, to develop our capacities, to live virtuously and well. Existence is justified by the possibility of achieving this natural end. This teleological worldview shaped Western thought for centuries, providing a framework where existence had built-in meaning and purpose. The universe was understood as an ordered cosmos in which everything had its proper place and function. Human existence was not absurd or arbitrary, but was meaningful by virtue of fitting into this larger order. Medieval Christian philosophy integrated this Aristotelian framework with religious doctrine, holding that human existence serves divine purposes, that we exist because God created us, and that our purpose is to know and love God and attain salvation. The modern scientific worldview challenged this teleological understanding of nature. As science developed, it increasingly explained natural phenomena through efficient causes, through mechanical interactions and natural laws, rather than through purposes and goals. The universe came to be seen not as a purposeful cosmos, but as a vast collection of matter in motion, governed by impersonal physical laws without inherent meaning or purpose. Life emerged through natural selection, a blind process without goals or intentions. Human beings are products of evolutionary processes that were not aiming at producing us, that would have been equally satisfied with any other outcome that survived and reproduced successfully. This scientific picture of nature as purposeless mechanism created what some have called the crisis of meaninglessness in modern philosophy. If the universe has no inherent purpose, if we are merely chance products of mindless evolutionary processes, if there is no cosmic plan or divine intention behind our existence, then in what sense does our existence have meaning or purpose? This question became particularly acute in existentialist philosophy of the 19th and 20th centuries, which made human existence and its meaning central concerns. Søren Kierkegaard, often considered the first existentialist philosopher, emphasized that the subjective dimension of human existence and the radical freedom and responsibility this entails. For Kierkegaard, existence is not something that can be understood from the outside through objective analysis. It must be lived from within, experienced in its immediacy and concreteness. The question of why we exist cannot be answered by abstract philosophical systems or scientific theories. It must be answered through how we choose to exist, through the commitments we make and the lives we live. Kierkegaard emphasized authentic existence, living in accordance with one's deepest self, rather than conforming to social expectations or losing oneself in distractions. Friedrich Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God, the collapse of traditional religious and metaphysical frameworks that had previously provided meaning and value. Without God or any transcendent source of meaning, humanity faces the challenge of creating its own values and purposes. Nietzsche did not see this as cause for despair, but as an opportunity for human creativity and self-overcoming. We exist not to fulfill some predetermined purpose, but to create purposes, to become who we are through acts of self-creation and self-affirmation. The question of why we exist is answered not by discovering some external purpose, but by willing our existence, by saying yes to life despite its suffering and meaninglessness. Martin Heidegger approached the question of existence through careful phenomenological analysis of human being, which he called Dasein. Dasein is characterized by existence, by being in the world in a way that involves understanding and interpretation of being. We exist in a distinctive way because our being is an issue for us. We cannot avoid making choices about how to be, and these choices shape what we become. Heidegger distinguished authentic from inauthentic existence. Inauthentic existence involves losing oneself in the they, conforming to public norms and expectations without taking responsibility for one's own being. Authentic existence involves owning one's possibilities, accepting one's finitude and mortality, and choosing how to be, rather than simply drifting along with convention. For Heidegger, the question of why we exist might be wrongly formulated. Existence is not something that needs external justification or purpose. Being is the most basic fact, the condition for all questions and answers. The proper question is not why we exist, but how to exist. How to be in a way that is true to the possibilities inherent in our being. This requires confronting fundamental existential realities like mortality, freedom, and groundlessness. We are thrown into existence without having chosen it. We face a future that ends in death, and we must choose how to live without any ultimate foundation or guarantee that our choices are correct. Jean-Paul Sartre developed existentialism in a more explicitly atheistic direction, emphasizing that existence precedes essence. Unlike artifacts that are created with predetermined purposes, human beings first exist and only then create their essence through their choices and actions. There is no human nature that determines what we should be or do. We are radically free to define ourselves through our choices, and this freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. Sartre described this as being condemned to be free, thrust into existence without a predetermined nature or purpose, forced to choose what to become without any guidance beyond our own projects and values. This existential freedom brings with it profound responsibility. If there are no objective values or purposes that determine what we should do, then we are responsible for creating values through our choices. Bad faith involves denying this freedom and responsibility, pretending that our actions are determined by circumstances or human nature or social roles. Authentic existence requires accepting our freedom and responsibility, making choices without self-deception, and creating meaning through our projects and commitments, despite the ultimate groundlessness of these choices. Albert Camus approached the question of existence through the concept of the absurd. The absurd arises from the confrontation between our human need for meaning and purpose and the indifferent, meaningless universe we inhabit. We long for answers to why we exist, for cosmic significance, for life to make sense. But the universe offers no answers, no purposes, no meaning. It simply is, indifferent to our needs and questions. This confrontation between human longing and cosmic silence is the absurd condition of human existence. Camus argued that we must neither escape the absurd through false hope, nor surrender to it through suicide or despair. Instead, we must embrace the absurd, must acknowledge the meaninglessness of existence, while nevertheless living fully and creating our own meanings. The image of Sisyphus endlessly pushing a boulder up a mountain, only to have it roll back down, captures the human condition. The task is meaningless, repetitive, futile. Yet Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy, finding satisfaction in the struggle itself rather than in any ultimate achievement or purpose. We exist without cosmic reason or purpose, but we can create meaning through our revolt against the absurd, through our commitment to live fully despite meaninglessness. Religious existentialists like Karl Jaspers and Gabriel Marcel offer different perspectives, arguing that authentic existence involves openness to transcendence, to what lies beyond the finite world of ordinary experience, while agreeing that existence cannot be fully explained through scientific or rational means. These thinkers maintained that human existence points beyond itself, that our questioning and seeking reveals a dimension of transcendence that scientific analysis cannot capture. We exist not just as biological organisms, but as beings oriented toward the infinite, toward values and meanings that transcend finite existence. Eastern philosophical traditions approach questions of existence quite differently. Buddhist philosophy holds that the question of why we exist may itself be misguided, based on false assumptions about the nature of existence and self. The belief in a permanent substantial self that exists is itself seen as illusion. What we call the self is actually a collection of impermanent processes, constantly changing, lacking any unchanging essence. The question of why this self exists presupposes that there is such a self, which Buddhist analysis denies. Rather than seeking meaning or purpose for a non-existent permanent self, Buddhist philosophy recommends recognizing the impermanence and non-self character of all phenomena, which leads to liberation from suffering. Hindu philosophy in the Advaita Vedanta tradition teaches that ultimate reality is Brahman, pure consciousness or being, and that the individual self, Atman, is ultimately identical with Brahman. The apparent separateness of individual existence is Maya, illusion or appearance. In this view, we exist because we are manifestations of ultimate reality, expressions of the one infinite being that is the ground of all existence. The question of why we exist is answered by recognizing our true nature as identical with ultimate reality. The goal is not to create meaning in a meaningless universe, but to realize the deeper reality behind appearances. to awaken to our true being as Brahman. Taoist philosophy emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, the way or pattern of nature, rather than asking why we exist in terms of purposes or reasons. Taoism suggests accepting existence as it is, flowing with natural patterns, rather than imposing human intentions and goals. We exist as part of the natural unfolding of the Tao, and the question of why becomes less pressing when we cease trying to force existence into artificial purposes and instead allow ourselves to be part of nature's spontaneous manifestations. Contemporary philosophy approaches existential questions through various frameworks. Analytic philosophy tends to focus on clarifying what the question means and what kinds of answers could possibly be satisfactory. Pragmatist philosophy examines what practical difference different answers to existential questions make for how we live. Phenomenology continues the existentialist project of describing the structures of human existence and experience. Feminist philosophy examines how existential questions are shaped by gender and how traditional answers may reflect male-biased perspectives. The question of cosmic purpose, whether the universe itself has a purpose or reason for existing, connects to debates in philosophy of religion and cosmology. The cosmological argument for God's existence claims that the universe must have a cause or explanation, and this ultimate explanation is God. The fine-tuning argument points to how the physical constants of the universe appear precisely calibrated to allow life to emerge, suggesting design or purpose behind cosmic structure. Critics respond that the universe might simply exist as a brute fact, requiring no explanation, or that apparent fine-tuning could be explained by multiverse theories, where many universes exist with different constants, making it unsurprising that we find ourselves in one compatible with life. Questions about the meaning of individual human lives can be distinguished from questions about cosmic purpose. Even if the universe as a whole has no purpose, individual lives might have meaning. Meaning can be found in relationships, in creative work, in pursuing goals and projects that matter to us, in alleviating suffering, in appreciating beauty, in understanding the world, in living according to values we endorse. These sources of meaning do not require cosmic purpose or divine plan. They arise from the structure of human life and consciousness, from our capacity to care about things and find significance in our activities and relationships. Different theories of meaning in life offer different accounts of what makes lives meaningful. Subjectivism holds that meaning is entirely subjective, that lives are meaningful to the extent that people are satisfied with them or find them fulfilling. Objectivism holds that some lives are objectively more meaningful than others, regardless of whether people recognize this. That genuine meaning requires connection to objectively valuable activities or ends. Hybrid theories hold that meaning requires both subjective and objective components. That lives are meaningful when people are engaged in objectively worthwhile activities that they find fulfilling. The role of death in existential questions about why we exist has been emphasized by many existentialist thinkers. Mortality defines human existence, giving it a finite structure and urgency. If we lived forever, the question of how to live might be less pressing, but knowing that life is limited forces questions about what matters, what is worth doing with the time we have, how to live authentically given our finitude. Heidegger argued that awareness of mortality, what he called being toward death, is essential for authentic existence. Only by accepting our mortality can we take full responsibility for our lives and make genuine choices about how to be? The question of why we exist might be unanswerable, in the sense that no explanation would fully satisfy our desire for cosmic significance. Some philosophers argue that existence is simply a brute fact, that asking why there is something rather than nothing is like asking what is north of the North Pole, a question that seems meaningful but actually presupposes a framework that does not apply. The question assumes there could be nothing instead of something, but perhaps existence is necessary rather than contingent. Perhaps non-existence is not a genuine possibility. If existence is necessary, if there must be something, then asking why there is something has no answer because there is no alternative. Others argue that the question of why we exist matters not because it has a definitive answer, but because asking it and grappling with it shapes how we live. The search for meaning and purpose is itself meaningful, even if no final answer is reached. The examined life, the life that questions its own significance and seeks understanding, is more fully human than a life lived without reflection. Existential questions are not problems to be solved, but aspects of human existence to be engaged with continuously. The role of absurdity in human existence, the recognition that our search for meaning confronts a meaningless universe, need not lead to nihilism or despair. Acknowledging absurdity can be liberating, freeing us from false hopes and allowing us to create our own meanings without illusion. Camus's revolt against the absurd, his insistence on living fully, despite meaninglessness, represents one response. Sartre's emphasis on creating essence through free choice represents another. Both reject passive acceptance of meaninglessness, while also rejecting comforting illusions that deny the fundamental absurdity of existence. The relationship between individual existence and community raises questions about whether meaning must be found individually or emerges through social connections and shared projects. Some existentialists emphasized individual authenticity and freedom, perhaps underestimating the extent to which we are social beings, whose identities and meanings are constituted through relationships. Feminist philosophers have critiqued individualistic existentialism, emphasizing that we exist always in relation to others, that our being is fundamentally relational rather than isolated. Meaning might arise less from individual projects than from participation in communities and relationships that give our lives context and significance. Questions about reproduction and the perpetuation of human existence add another dimension. Why do we create new existences, bring new human beings into the world? Is this justified, and if so, by what? Anti-natalist philosophers argue that creating new sentient beings who will inevitably suffer is ethically problematic, that it would be better if humans ceased reproducing and existence ended. Pro-natalists argue that existence is a gift despite its difficulties, that creating new life allows for new experiences of meaning and value, that pessimistic antinatalism undervalues the positive aspects of existence. These debates about procreation and the value of existence itself reflect deeper disagreements about whether existence is fundamentally good or bad, whether being is preferable to non-being. The possibility of post-human existence, of human enhancement through technology, or of artificial intelligence that might surpass human capabilities, raises new existential questions. If we could radically alter human nature through genetic engineering, or brain-computer interfaces, or uploading consciousness to computers, would this be desirable? Would post-human beings face the same existential questions about meaning and purpose? Would enhancing our cognitive and physical capacities make existence more meaningful, or might it eliminate the constraints and limitations that give human life its particular character and significance? Environmental philosophy and ethics raise existential questions about humanity's place in the broader web of life and whether human existence has inherent priority over other forms of existence. Deep ecology challenges anthropocentrism, the view that humans are the center of value and meaning. If we are merely one species among millions, if our existence is no more cosmically significant than that of insects or plants, this might seem to diminish human importance. But it might also connect human existence to something larger, situating us within nature rather than separate from or above it, finding meanings in participation in the broader ecological community rather than in dominance over it. The psychological and therapeutic dimensions of existential philosophy have been developed through existential psychology and therapy. Viktor Frankl, drawing on his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, developed logotherapy based on the premise that the primary human drive is the search for meaning. Even in extreme suffering, finding meaning in one's suffering or maintaining commitment to values and purposes can sustain people. The will to meaning differs from the will to pleasure or power emphasized by other psychological theories. Existential therapy helps individuals confront existential anxieties about death, freedom, meaninglessness, and isolation, supporting them in creating authentic meanings rather than avoiding existential realities. The question of why we exist may ultimately circle back to the questioner, to the fact that we are beings for whom existence is a question. Other animals presumably do not wonder why they exist or what their lives mean. They simply live according to their natures. But humans are self-aware in ways that generate existential questions. We exist not only but exist in a way that involves reflecting on our existence, interpreting it, questioning it. This reflexive character of human existence means that how we understand our existence affects how we exist. If we see existence as meaningless, this shapes how we live. If we see it as purposeful, this shapes our choices differently. Perhaps the question of why we exist has no single answer, because different people and cultures find meaning in different ways, and no universal template for meaningful existence fits all human lives. What gives one person's life meaning might not work for another. Some find meaning in religious faith, others in creative work, others in relationships, others in pursuit of knowledge or beauty or justice. The plurality of sources of meaning suggests that human existence is rich and multifaceted, capable of supporting many different ways of living meaningfully. The question might also be approached through gratitude and wonder rather than through demands for justification. Rather than asking whether existence is justified or purposeful in some cosmic sense, we might simply appreciate that we exist, that we get to experience consciousness and life, that we participate in the extraordinary phenomenon of existence itself. This attitude does not require answers to why, but simply acknowledges the remarkable fact that we are here. Existential philosophy in this mode becomes less about solving the puzzle of existence and more about appreciating its mystery and living authentically within it. The question of why we exist remains open, generating ongoing philosophical reflection and personal searching. Different traditions and thinkers offer different perspectives, from religious answers about divine purpose to existentialist emphasis on creating meaning to Buddhist skepticism about whether the question is well formed. No single answer commands universal acceptance, yet the questioning continues, not because philosophers have failed, but because these questions are inexhaustible, reflecting the deep mystery of existence itself and our need to understand our place in the universe. The questioning itself, the engagement with these fundamental issues, becomes part of how we exist meaningfully as philosophical beings, as creatures who cannot help but wonder about our own existence and seek to understand what it means to be.